Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest, our special guest today. Koohan Paik-Mander is a journalist, media educator, and activist known for her work on militarism, environmental issues, and digital technologies. Growing up in post-war Korea and on the U.S. colony of Guam, and she'll correct me if any of this is incorrect, she developed a deep understanding of geopolitical tensions and their impact on communities. Paik-Mander has been a vocal advocate for peace and environmental justice, serving on the board of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space and participating in the Code Pink working group China is Not Our Enemy. Koohan has written extensively on militarism in the Asia-Pacific region, contributing to publications such as The Nation, The Progressive, and Foreign Policy in Focus. Her work highlights the intersection of technology, warfare, and environmental degradation, warning against the militarization of civil society through digital advancements. And Koohan, I just wanted to tell you that that's what I got when I asked DeepSeek AI to write me a short essay on you. There's a little bit more. So just thought I'd give you a little tease about that. But there's you have a really remarkable, interesting life. And if you want to share a little bit more about yourself before you dive into the topic, I'm sure everybody would like to hear from you.
Thank you, Jerry, and the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Abolition Working Group for this opportunity to share my latest research. I've dropped some choice links that relate to this content into the chat. I urge you to copy them and take a look at them all later. So war historians will remember the Ukraine war as the moment in which warfighting transitioned. The war began with a battalion of tanks at the Russian border, but since that era, the battlefield has become dominated by drone swarms, missiles, and other unmanned attacks controlled by AI and satellites. Today, 5 years since the start of the war, other wars have broken out. Genocide in Gaza, war on the Red Sea, the fighting between Pakistan and India, and then there was the attack on the flotilla, the Conscience, that was going to bring aid into Gaza. All of these weapons, for the most part, have been unmanned. When we examine AI as it relates to nukes, we cannot do so without also examining the paradigm shift now taking place, not just in warfare, but in civilization at large. Just as it would be woefully incomplete to examine the implications of automotive technology by examining only cars and not the freeways, the suburbs, the drive-ins, and the strip malls, it would also be an oversight to examine only algorithms and not the infrastructures being erected for the express purpose of integrating AI into every aspect of our lives, including how wars are fought. The most significant impacts of any technology are always systemic. There's a campaign going on now to entrench AI into everyday life. It would be a civilizational transformation even further into fascism than we already are, if it succeeds. The Trump administration is actively building the physical infrastructure to make AI an essential utility and the nation's leading industry. That's why, buried deep in the big, brutal bill, is Section 43201. It's a provision that not only funds the plan for full-scale AI expansion, it also removes every state's right to regulate AI for the next decade. For the next 10 years, no state will be allowed to create its own safeguards, protections, or liability standards for how AI is developed or deployed. So let's unpack what AI is and what an AI industry looks like. This is an industry that requires an infrastructure of surveillance to operate. The harvesting of surveillance data and then the number crunching that takes place in data centers is what we're talking about. Now, I'm going to repeat this operative truth. AI cannot function without two aspects of a surveillance infrastructure. They're actually infrastructures in their own right, the infrastructure of surveillance and extraction, and the infrastructure of data centers. I'll go into exactly what these are in a moment, because it's important to know all this, because these are the points of intervention in slowing down or stopping the juggernaut. And the nuclear industry is very much enmeshed in this gigantic plan to transform civilization. The entrenchment of AI in our daily lives is being spearheaded by Palantir Corporation. Palantir was co-founded shortly after 9/11 by PayPal co-founders Peter Thiel and Alex Karp with seed money from In-Q-Tel, which funds CIA-friendly projects. Palantir is infamous for having used its surveillance, data gathering, and algorithms to track down and kill Osama bin Laden. The company has a very strong presence these days in Israel, as do all notable AI companies. It was the developer of the notorious Lavender AI software that generates the so-called kill lists for the Israeli Defense Forces, generating tens of thousands of Palestinian targets at a time for the IDF. They do this through hoarding data collected on the people through their extensive surveillance infrastructure and then manipulating the data through algorithms. It's called kill chain technology. Recently, Palantir has broadened its goals from designing surveillance and kill chain technology for combat zones to using the same sorts of data hoarding and manipulation to monitor citizens, customers, employees, and in schools, hospitals, courts, banks, public spaces, and private spaces. Already there's a program in the Trump administration to funnel the data from every agency database in the US government into Palantir. One of the stated missions of Palantir is to run the operating system for the entire federal government. That means access to the data of every American and also developing AI to control people, information, money, weapons, you name it. It's full spectrum surveillance and control. It's no coincidence that the Palantir co-founders work closely with Elon Musk and have been since the 1990s when they all worked together at PayPal. In fact, 2 of the Doge snoops were recruited directly from Palantir earlier this year. In addition to government data, Palantir would have absolute access to the data we continually generate through what is loosely called the Internet of Things. That's the network of smart appliances and gadgets and voice and facial recognition and biometric sensors, doorbells, the stove, the washer, the car, everything that's been rigged out as, quote, smart technology. And of course, the big brother device in your purse or pocket masquerading as a phone. All these extraction devices are hooked up to talk to each other and the manufacturers and the government to continually send data to companies and the government and follow every move we make, because every move we make, every breath we take becomes valuable data. They are continually harvesting people's behavior and merging it all together to create an individualized profile for each person. And it's not only our behavior patterns that are harvested, it's also our DNA. Next time you get a blood draw, especially if you're on Medicare or Medicaid or the VA, read the fine print. Department of Health and Human Services, like all the federal agencies, is building a database for this AI. In their case, a database of DNA, which can be fed into AI models to create new proteins, new viruses, new bacteria, entirely new life forms. This is known as synthetic biology, which is often called synbio. The main motivation is to turn DHHS into a bio-warfare hub. Yes, you heard right. This preposterous program is called MedShield, and actually there was a MedShield bill introduced last year under Biden. Fortunately, it died in session. I have a sneaking suspicion that this autism registry that RFK Jr. recently proposed was introduced as a backdoor into DNA data collection because the MedShield bill proved to be so unpopular. Incidentally, biotech companies are vacuuming up all the DNA samples of all the flora and fauna they can get their hands on in order to build these large language model AI data sets as well. The AI enables them to quickly reconfigure new genetic sequences and create new types of organisms in volume that can be financialized in a number of ways. There's no regulation, and as you can imagine, this kind of playing God will no doubt wreak havoc on the intricate web of life. But getting back to humans and surveillance, Palantir creates its civilian profiles by using programs nearly identical to the kill chain AI that it uses on the battlefield. The stages of the battlefield kill chain are find, fix, track, target, engage, and assess. Palantir follows the same protocol to aggregate and construct detailed civilian profiles, deploying invasive surveillance networks, analyzing location data, loyalty programs at stores, third-party data, social media activity, and other sources. This type of categorization, known as fixing in the military context, allows Palantir to mark civilians for all kinds of targeted action, most commonly for persuasion activities like marketing or to shift political views. But this level of granular, full-spectrum surveillance can play out in other ways. For example, we might miss a payment on our auto insurance, and then the insurance company sends a signal to our car that deactivates the starter so that we can't drive it. Or if we happen to be a legal resident alien and make a pro-Palestinian post on Facebook, we could be met by ICE officials in the morning and deported to El Salvador. This is taking place. Or say you're living in one of these smart homes enclosed by such a surveillance infrastructure. Every person who comes to your home becomes from then on permanently associated with your data. If that person happens to get involved in a crime, such as a murder, or these days, if they're a pro-Palestine protester, then that crime, quote unquote, is associated with you because that person's profile is now associated with your profile. You might be denied a good credit report because of this, or denied insurance, a job. This, by the way, is precisely the same technology that Palantir uses to determine in Gaza who is a terrorist. Just being near someone who was a known terrorist can trigger the AI to put you on the kill list. It's the Stasi on steroids. Before Palantir, the poster child for controlling the world through data manipulation had been Cambridge Analytica, with whom Palantir had worked. Cambridge Analytica, if you recall, was the cyber warfare company hired by Steve Bannon that ran AI programs on 230 million Americans. The AI predicted who were the most vulnerable to persuasion. Then they targeted those people with elaborately subtle propaganda campaigns that persuaded them to vote for Trump in 2016. And it worked. Cambridge Analytica also influenced voters to vote for Brexit the following year. And it worked. This all gives you an idea of the AI-driven future as the present and the future being built. Our shopping, our civilian life, our transportation, our defense, all organized to be controlled by essentially one corporation, Palantir. Keep in mind that co-founder Peter Thiel fueled J.D. Vance's political rise and also donated significantly to the Trump campaign. And in proper quid pro quo form, Palantir has been rewarded with a contract to design all the AI to control our Social Security, our taxes, our healthcare, all of it. And, of course, the code to launch nuclear weapons. This monolithic omnipotence blurs the line between civilian and military, friend and foe. Its main trajectory is towards subjugation, full stop. Fascism. Peter Thiel has already invested in efforts to create whole new governments that run on technocracy rather than democracy, which he says is incompatible with freedom. Sure, his freedom to run roughshod over any environmental or human rights regulation. Now, it sure seems like a conflict of interest to me that this man who owns the company that is reshaping the United States federal government agencies and who owns all our data is someone who unapologetically loathes democracy. Silicon Valley has essentially weaponized government to treat the people as the enemy. You don't get much more disruptive than that. In a way, if you understand the inherent nature of digitalization, it makes perfect sense. You see, digital technology originated as a missile defense technology. That was its genesis. Subjugation and domination are built in. The advent of AI has just sped that process up 1,000-fold. which is why we should advocate for abolition. But before I go any further, I should go off on a necessary tangent to demystify AI itself and how it works just a bit. So what exactly is AI? Most importantly, it is not intelligence. It doesn't think. It is a very sophisticated classification process that makes predictions off of large amounts of data. You first build an AI by collecting an enormous amount of data, which you use to program it. You can't build an AI without this data. You program the AI to recognize sentences, images, DNA sequences even. It's a pattern recognizer. Once it's adequately programmed, you can then use that model to make predictions. You could give it part of a sentence and it would be able to finish it with the right word. You could give it a series of prompts and request that it compile an image because it was programmed to recognize the patterns of millions of images. It would be able to predict what you were requesting. You could request a genetic sequence with certain attributes, such as, give me a virus that doesn't show symptoms but is highly contagious. And because it was programmed by millions of virus samples, it would be able to generate countless examples of what you requested. But programming AI is never completed. It must constantly be fed continual streams of data. It's just the nature of it. And as a result, it requires a surveillance infrastructure to continually harvest data and feed it to the AI. And as we know, surveillance is a cornerstone of fascism. All that data is why Musk couldn't wait to get his hands on it first thing, because you cannot run an AI utility without that constant stream of data. These days, data is considered more valuable than gold. They're even calling it, quote, the new oil, end quote. So if data is the new oil, then the oil refinery is AI. But even with all that data, the AI still makes mistakes. It's the law of probability since it doesn't think. It's a fancy machine that makes educated guesses. And because they're just guesses, they're often wrong. But the industry doesn't call them mistakes. They call them hallucinations because they love to anthropomorphize these machines. So these hallucinations are baked into the technology. If you want to figure out how the mistakes in AI happen, you can't, because there are millions of calculations going on at any one given time. There's just simply no way to look under the hood, so to speak. This is what they call the black box phenomenon. And because there's no way to know how a mistake got made, there's no accountability, which could be consequential if you're dealing with, say, someone's medical records. The black box phenomenon, in my opinion, is another reason why AI should be abolished. We're just expected to just accept this margin of error that happens to be between 3 and 30%. Society is supposed to just let go of standards of accountability simply because, hey, the machines are in charge now. I don't think so. Another egregious deal breaker about AI is the immoral impact to the environment in energy consumption, water consumption, and land use from these data centers. Just so we're clear, whenever we talk about the cloud, where we store our documents, that's just another way of talking about data centers. Calling it, quote, the cloud makes us imagine something abstract and light and fluffy, which couldn't be farther from the truth. You might have heard of the Stargate project introduced at Trump's inauguration by oligarchs Sam Altman, Larry Ellison, and Masayoshi Son. Remember, they all lined up at the press conference to announce the $500 billion project that is intended to cover the continent with data centers from sea to shining sea. How this would look on the ground would be enormous warehouses that are 500,000 square feet each, constructed in clusters all over the nation. Each warehouse is slated to be the size of 2.5 Walmart superstores or 8.5 football fields. Each would be filled from ceiling to floor with stacks of metal boxes, computers which process all the AI calculations, which are in the billions per second, and which cause the machines to heat up with all those calculations. So to cool them, Giant pipes filled with water snake through the basements of these buildings with capillaries of cooling water that branch off up to run up alongside each of the machines. The water consumption for cooling data centers is enormous. Wherever data centers are built, all nature perishes because it is a wholesale smothering of the earth with concrete in addition to all the water usage. Querétaro is the only Mexican state with its entirety at high risk of drought. It also is where the Silicon Valley giants have chosen to develop what could become the largest data center hub in Latin America. Querétaro is already hosting at least 19 functioning data centers and planning to install at least 9 more to support the AI boom. Data centers are extracting drinking water there while farmers' crops wither. Right now, the highest concentration of data centers in the world is in Northern Virginia due to its proximity to the Pentagon. After all, you can't do modern warfare without AI, and you can't do AI without data centers. Now that the goal is to outfit the entire nation with AI, there's a huge boom on data center construction across the country. 10 are now going up in Abilene, Texas. Each one of the 10 would use between 20 megawatts to upwards of 100 megawatts of power. To give a comparison, the entire island of Hawaii, where I live, uses 180 megawatts of energy. According to the International Energy Agency, by 2030, only 5 years from now, the data centers will consume more electricity globally than manufacturing of steel, cement, chemicals, and all other energy-intensive goods combined worldwide. In Southwest Memphis, Tennessee, Elon Musk's AI company called xAI operates Colossus. That's the world's largest data center. He calls it a supercomputer, which is another word for data center. Colossus was gobbling up so much power than much more than the local grid could supply that Musk felt compelled to set up 14 carbon-spewing mobile generators, much to the ire of the neighbors. Koohan Pearson, president of Memphis Community Against Pollution, said, "The ongoing policy violence that allows xAI to continue the consistent damaging of our lungs in Southwest Memphis is immoral. We deserve clean air, not silent strangulation." End quote. Colossus has submitted a request to the county to increase its power consumption to 150 megawatts. Keep in mind, the whole island where I reside uses a total of 180 megawatts. So just for this one data center. As the earth continues to reel with floods and fires and storms and other climate-related disasters, it is preposterous to establish networks of carbon-spewing data centers across the American landscape and the planet. For this reason, Bill Gates, Sam Altman, Jeff Bezos, and the other Silicon villains have been pushing for a so-called renaissance of nuclear energy, and they've begun research and development of SMRs with the false goal of being carbon neutral. As you know, SMR stands for Small Modular Reactor. What never gets reported is that there are massive amounts of carbon released in the mining and processing of uranium to fuel the SMRs. They are not carbon neutral nor renewable, despite the false narratives being currently promoted, nor have any viable models even been developed yet. In any case, Altman, Gates, and Bezos are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into developing the first mass-produced SMRs so that every data center can have one of its own. Today, as a matter of fact, in the Oval Office, Trump responded to reporters asking about his new executive orders to deregulate nuclear power. And he said this, quote, "We're going to get it very fast. We're going to get it very safe." And he added, "It's time for nuclear," end quote. Officials from both the Biden and the Trump administrations have likened this vision of proliferating data centers across the nation to the Interstate Highway Act of 1956 that connected all our states and cities with highways. Both administrations have proposed using federal lands as well, such as national parks, for these data centers. For me, watching the data centers go up is like watching the coastline being blasted on Jeju Island only to be paved over to build a Navy base. It's like watching the limestone forest on Guam cut down in order to construct a live fire training range. It's like watching the farming villages at Pyeongtaek, Korea protest the construction of one of the world's largest military bases in their ancestral home. So I'm used to watching the horror of autocracy smashing nature and community to build the infrastructure of empire. Only difference is now it's in my own country. They say that when colonization strikes at home, it's fascism. And this is where we're at. What goes around comes around, I guess. As part of the Stargate project, 16 Department of Energy locations, including Los Alamos, have been proposed to be the site of the data center, of a data center with a companion power source. SMRs, of course, being the preference. Though Stargate was promoted as being a private enterprise, it appears that the integration of the project with DOE facilities would qualify it as publicly funded. Yet there is no mention of an EIS, which would be required by the National Environmental Policy Act for a publicly funded project. So these proposals are proposals right now, but they're hoping to build on as many of the 16 sites as possible and begin operations in 2027. And those sites are Idaho National Lab, Paducah Gaseous Diffusion Plant, Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant, Argonne National Lab, Brookhaven National Lab, Fermi National Accelerator Lab, National Energy Technology Lab, National Renewable Energy Lab, Oak Ridge National Lab, Pacific Northwest National Lab, Princeton Plaza Physics Lab, Los Alamos National Lab, Sandia National Lab, Savannah River Site, Pantex Plant, and the Kansas City National Security Campus. Finally, let's turn to the topic of nukes and AI, nuclear weapons. How might AI play out during an escalation between nuclear powers? Astonishingly, military planners believe it is impossible to leave decision-making to humans. Humans, they believe, are not smart enough to make decisions with necessary speed and efficiency during the pressure of battle. They're believed to be prone to panic during the urgency of the moment. Machines, by contrast, they believe, don't panic, and for this reason, AI is being deployed virtually exclusively to supposedly recognize and assess incoming threats, nuclear or not. Now, why they don't factor the hallucinations I described earlier into this reality, those built-in mistakes when describing the technology to Congress, is beyond me. Well, it's not beyond me. It's all about the money. The war planners assure Congress and everyone, don't worry, we'll always make sure we've got what they say, a human in the loop. You hear that again and again, human in the loop. So that's basically a token human. Is a token human supposed to make us feel safer? In any case, anyone who understands token politics knows the token individual can't change the dominant system. They either bend the system or they risk stigmatization of getting fired. That's what makes them a token. The same is true when the human token stands alone in a machine system as the token. So my friend Charles Powell, who is a member of Veterans for Peace in Albuquerque, was an airman during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Charles was part of the Titan Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Launch Crew. He told me that he and his teammates based in North Dakota were prepared to obediently launch a nuclear missile toward Russia if ordered. Fortunately, that never happened, as cooler human heads prevailed when Kennedy and Khrushchev resisted the so-called advice of their cabinet members. Charles told me that if a machine had been in charge, he believes it would not have had the capacity for reflection required to de-escalate. And I wouldn't be here now, he added. But that was then, and this is now. Back then, no one ever factored into the equation what we have now, that one day AI algorithms would be programmed and positioned to press the button. Back when humans were in charge, mutually assured destruction was believed to be a viable deterrent. Whether that was true or not is debatable, but what is certain is that for all of the billions of data points that go into programming this kind of AI, the option of diplomacy is never programmed into the algorithmic equation. These algorithms couldn't care less about mutually assured destruction or whether the whole planet is blown to smithereens. And yet, the US is now plowing record amounts of money into more military AI development. This isn't an arms race, it's a suicide race. The most guaranteed and least talked about consequence of the marriage of AI to nukes will be the impact on Native communities. It will be they who will bear the brunt, as they always have, of these deleterious impacts of the life cycle of the nuclear industry. Currently, they've been confronted by this so-called nuclear renaissance, and that's what they're calling this basically push to ramp up a nuclear industry to power the data centers, and along with it is the new modernization program to manufacture the nuclear pits. The nuclear pits, by the way, happen to be the part of the bomb that explodes into apocalyptic destruction. But New Mexico is the burden that bears the brunt of it all. It is the state that has been uniquely burdened with every stage of the nuclear industry's life cycle ever since Oppenheimer anguished pretentiously over whether or not he should have become death, the destroyer of worlds. He chose death. And the result is that New Mexico is now to nuclear what Detroit once was to automobiles. It is where uranium mining has irreversibly poisoned the water and land, and plans for expanded mining now, because of this nuclear so-called renaissance, will impact communities not only in New Mexico, but also in other Western states reaching as far as Montana. So getting back to this modernization program, it is a euphemism. Modernization is a euphemism for manufacture, and the nuclear pits are being manufactured at Los Alamos lab. Each one of these bombs will have about 20 times the destructive force of the bomb that leveled Hiroshima. They've already started producing at the rate of 30 pits per year. By 2030, the plan is to manufacture 80 to 100 pits per year. And it would be safe to assume that with this increase in pit production, we'd also see an increase in nuclear testing, probably underground nuclear testing. This notion is traumatizing to New Mexico citizens, especially the downwinders who are still suffering from serious health problems from nuclear testing, like Trinity. These days, Los Alamos is in the middle of an environmental impact statement process in an effort to expand the nuclear pit production as well as all activities. One of the proposed expansion activities is the construction of a data center along with an accompanying power source, which I described earlier. They folded the data center project into the Los Alamos expansion EIS. New Mexico also is the home to WIP. That's the only U.S. facility where radioactive waste from weapons manufacture is stored. It stands for, WIP, stands for Waste Isolation Pilot Project. It was just a pilot program open to receive waste in 1999 with a 25-year contract that expired last year. During that 25-year period, DOE was to identify new sites in other states and build new facilities and close WIP in April of last year, 2024. But DOE broke that promise, and now they're digging new tunnels at WIP to house the waste from future weapons production in New Mexico, as well as out of state. And then there's another EIS, a separate one from the WIP, which has spelled out that their plans are to keep expanding this landfill for 69 more years. And yet it's surrounded by fracking wells. And what about radioactive waste from the hundreds of small modular reactors that are being planned to be operating in the coming years with these data centers? Hell, the project to clean up 56 million gallons of nuclear waste left over from World War II bomb production at the Hanford nuclear site is still unfinished. And to add insult to injury, DOGE decimated the funding and staff for that cleanup. At this rate, I wouldn't be surprised if they've got the WIP in mind to store that waste, along with anything coming out of the SMRs as well. In that likely scenario, our highways would be plied by trucks regularly transporting radioactive waste to New Mexico from locations around the country. And I can just imagine that they would be robotic trucks, unmanned trucks, and they'd say that it was for the safety of the drivers in case of an accident and the truck spills over on the highway. Further, the enrichment process in New Mexico is another stage in the nuclear life cycle that would imperil Native communities. The uranium that is used by the small modular reactors is far more enriched and thereby more radioactive than that used in traditional nuclear reactors. It's enriched almost to the level of weapons-grade uranium. You probably already know this, but it's always good to hear again that there is no safe level of exposure in the event of a radioactive plutonium release. Plutonium, by the way, is an artificial element created in nuclear reactors from uranium. Inhalation or ingestion of just one molecule will cause cancer. New Mexico communities, mostly indigenous, are extremely vulnerable to the guaranteed risks at every stage of the planned expansion of the nuclear industry because of data centers. They are at the center of the dangers of our new AI world. Yet the very real threats that a so-called nuclear renaissance are posing to the land, water, and native communities are not something we generally hear about in connection to AI. The symbiotic relationship between nuclear weapons, AI, and nuclear energy combines into a unique technology all its own. My late husband, Jerry, used to call this a mega technology. That is, a new reality where a mosaic of intertwining, interdependent technologies create entirely new symbiotic technologies. For example, the internet could also be described as a mega technology because it's a mosaic of the pre-existing technologies of video, audio, algorithms, text, and graphics. The internet wouldn't exist if it couldn't scaffold on these other technologies that had already been developed. And yet it still nonetheless stands independently as its own thing. That's mega technology. Likewise, AI is a mega technology. Its properties unify the disparate worlds of automated warfare, the nuclear industry, Earth's genomes, and all human activities into an interdependent conglomeration controlled by Silicon Valley. It merges killer robots with biowarfare, psychological manipulation, and many other weapons of mass destruction, as well as with benign applications like a Zoom call or AI customer service, which in a way makes it even more insidious. Once manipulated by the AI, even a seemingly harmless set of data like a genome or a predilection for dogs can be weaponized to work in concert with all the other data sets and effectively subjugate humanity and nature to the machine. I wish there were a word that delivers the full seriousness of AI mega technology. If Jerry were alive, I can picture him calling it mega techno-fascism. I say mega because there's a difference between mega techno-fascism and normal techno-fascism. Mega techno-fascism denotes the additional generations of intertwined technologies that are scaffolded upon earlier technologies and without which the new technologies would not exist. So, how do we fight back? How can we effectively defend humanity and all living beings against these new evils? Okay, let's think about this. Regardless of either how existential or how trivial an AI application may be, they all rely on two infrastructures, a surveillance infrastructure and a data center nuclear energy infrastructure. These infrastructures are far from being fully installed at the moment, even though we've been made to think that AI is a done deal. This is absolutely false. The infrastructures are not in place yet. In fact, the data centers already in existence have been causing a lot of problems because they're stressing out the nation's aging power grids. This is why they're pushing so hard to equip each one with its own power plant. So an effective point of intervention is at the data center build-out. Without all those data centers, the AI simply can't run at a level that would be considered adequate for an essential utility. We need to protest these data centers at every turn. The Piedmont Environmental Council has been involved in several legal actions related to data centers in Northern Virginia. Memphis Communities Against Pollution is another group at the forefront of opposing Elon Musk's XAI data center. A First Nation in Northern Alberta, Canada, is telling the provincial government there to cease and desist with their plans for a $70 billion data center. Wherever we can obstruct these data centers, We are roadblocking the normalization of fascism and autocracy. Obstructing the nuclear renaissance that's being planned to go with the data centers is also a point of intervention. Another path of resistance is by urging community businesses and services to not adopt AI. Find out from organizations you're involved with if they're using AI, schools, health clinics, nursing homes, auto mechanics, government agencies. There are so many businesses, agencies, and institutions that are falling for this tremendous pressure to adopt AI. Don't let them normalize it. Team up with others in your community to collectively reject AI. Form an AI free zone in your community, like they have the nuclear free zones. And the other infrastructure that AI needs to function at the industrial scale is the surveillance extraction infrastructure. That infrastructure is all around us. It exists to suck data from our every move. To weaken it is so much simpler than you would think. Get offline, pay cash, write checks, get a flip phone, write letters on paper, use the post office. Hey, you know what? There are these infrared deflection glasses that you can wear that scramble facial recognition technology, and I've got one on order. Get rid of all the smart technology. Don't join any shopping programs to earn points. All these devices and applications are extracting data from us to feed AI systems. Unplug Alexa, Siri, and quit talking to computers. Starve the bastards, just like any boycott. Don't let Silicon Valley curate our existence. If you remember the 20th century, and I know a lot of you out there do, then you remember, like I do, it was possible. We lived without digital technology then as we had for thousands of years. The fact is, a collective boycott of digital engagement will unravel mega techno-fascism, like pulling on a strand of yarn. And when we're collectively not online, providing the necessary data, the food to keep the AI mill humming, mega techno-fascism will shrivel up as quickly as throwing a bucket of water on the Wicked Witch of the West. Thank you.